craft an ideal value proposition, a great elevator pitch, know who your ideal client is, and you will craft the ability to build a really big business. So the other day I'm working with a client and they have a virtual assistant who is making phone calls for them on their behalf, opening doors. It's a wonderful use of a virtual assistant. A lot of businesses do it. In fact, I think we have probably 1,200, 1,300 people just doing this one thing, which is communicating value proposition to buyers and sellers out there in the marketplace who are interested in consuming your service or product. Now, here's what's interesting. He's like, hey, Daniel, I'm not having the success that I expected. I'm like, okay, that's interesting. Whenever somebody says I'm not winning, I'm always going like, is it the approach or is it the person? Those are the two questions. Is it the approach, like how they're doing it, or is it the human that they've hired that isn't the right style of person? You know, you don't want to hire an accountant and ask them to get on the phones. You don't want to hire a bubbly person and ask them to do your finances, right? You got to, those are the two things. So I'm talking to him, I'm like, hey, what's your approach? Share with me, you know, your scripts, your value proposition, what's your process, like just help me understand. Figured this was the problem, but of course what they were conveying just was not aspirational. It was a value proposition that was like, like just, it wasn't good. So we started talking about what is a value proposition and how should your customers respond. And the lesson in this for this customer and maybe for you is that when you convey a value proposition, the ideal client on the other side of the table ought to like jump. They ought to jump across the table and say, I need this. I need this product or service. Like I absolutely need it. And if your client doesn't say that, you're missing the point. You're not conveying value. And so of course, that was the issue, is that they weren't portraying an aspirational value proposition that their ideal customer absolutely needed. So we went through a whole exercise where I asked them a bunch of questions like, what's the problem you solve? You know, what happens if somebody doesn't buy from you? What happens when they do? What's the results? And we started like narrowing down on the value for this particular business. And so we got an aspirational value proposition. We solve this problems for these people so they can have this amazing life or amazing business. Like that's the aspirational. And then after talking to them, what I realized was sometimes you get people through the aspirational value proposition, and the alternative to that is the fear-based, because we're worried. Like we grew up in the jungle and people tried to kill us. So we are a fear-based world. So on the flip of the aspirational value proposition, we also went to the alternative, which is a fear-based value proposition, which is if you don't buy my service or product, you're missing out, or you're not as good as you could be, or you don't have as much profit, or you're gonna go the way of the dinosaur as a business owner. So those are the two places to craft a value proposition. One aspirational, where the customer's jumping over the table, and the other one fear-based, where if they don't get what you give them in terms of services or product, they're gonna be missing out. So those are the two ways to craft a value proposition that a virtual assistant or really any salesperson on your team or marketing person can convey value to your ideal customer. So I'm gonna go into a little bit of depth so that you can understand it. Number one, you have to identify your ideal client. So the best way to do that is like look into your database or the people who've bought your service or product over the last 3 to 5 years and say, who are my best clients? Who, you know, did I love working with that made us good profit, that if I could get 100 of them, it would completely transform my business. That's how you identify your ideal client. Like somebody who you want to work with, they want to work with you, and they find a ton of value in your product or service. That's an ideal client, okay? That's number one. Once you have that client, then you have to ask them questions like, hey, what do we do for you? Why did you choose us? What is amazing about our product? What are you really, really getting from our product or service? Like you actually have to interview and talk with your customers so you can understand what they value about your product or service. This is the mistake that most people make, is they sit in a room with their employees or their best friends or their spouses or something, and then they list all the things that they're amazing at. I'm a good negotiator, I get you the best price, blah, 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 blah. And the reality is that's like creating a value proposition in a vacuum where your customers, the people that you want to sell more to or give more services to, they don't even have a voice. So you have to include them and get feedback from them. A really smart person once said that your brand is not what your customers say to your face, it's what your customers say when you're not in the room. So you need to get that information. You need to get the information of what your customers, your ideal customers, say about your brand when you're not in the room. That's the biggest win you can get. If you get that information, it's like pure gold, because then you can craft the ideal value proposition, because they're telling you why they're buying their service or product. And this is a really, really big deal. When somebody tells you why, that's the information that you need to craft the value proposition, where they jump over the table and say, please give me more. So the easiest way is with an elevator pitch. I do this for this subgroup of people that need this, so they can have a life or a business or a result that completely transforms their life or business. That's the guts of an elevator pitch, right? I do this for this group of people so they can have this benefit. That's the way you craft an elevator pitch. Through that elevator pitch, that conversation with all of your ideal customers, then you can start crafting your 1 or 2 lines for an amazing value proposition. I'll give you an example. When I first started in real estate 20-something years ago, I'd go to a party and people were like, hey Daniel, what do you do? And my response was always, I make people wealthy through buying and selling real estate. Like I focused on investment properties for people to help them build wealth. Now it's very easy as a real estate person, right? I could say, oh, I'm a realtor, or I'm a real estate broker, or I own a real estate team, or I have real estate investments. That's a simple thing. I could say that as my value proposition, and the other people in the room would understand it. But when I said, hey, I help people build wealth through real estate, they were like, wait, what do you mean? What do you do? Tell me more. Because everybody wants to build wealth. And my vehicle for that was through real estate. So that got the conversations going. So that's the idea. Craft an ideal value proposition, a great elevator pitch, know who your ideal client is, and you will craft the ability to build a really big business. The reason I'm so passionate about this is because we help a lot of entrepreneurs craft these value propositions, communicate the value that they provide to their ideal customer. And this is always a sticking point. I can't tell you how many 10, 20, $50 million businesses that lose the ability to craft the ideal value proposition to their ideal clients. So if you're listening, you found value in this video, click below to the comments. We're actually gonna put a link to a one-pager, which will help you clarify your ideal value proposition, elevator pitch, and all this stuff. It's a big deal. This is the juice that drives revenue for a business. And if you can get your entire company and your employees all on the same page, so everybody is beating the drum just like you are as the entrepreneur, leader, C-suite person, you will grow and scale your business.